Today, we're going to compare the Fuji X-T3 using the Fringer adapter and the Sony A7 III using the MC11 adapter with Canon lenses to see which one comes out on top. Let's go! What's up everybody? Phil with Photo Gear Fun here. I've got an interesting one today. And before we get started, let me say, yes, I know this is not scientific, it's not perfect, and let me just try to head off the comments of the past. You didn't consider compression, you didn't consider X, you didn't consider Y, yada, yada, yada. That's right. All I wanted to do was show you the difference between the Fuji X-T3, which is a crop sensor camera, and the Sony A7 III, which is a full frame camera. And I tried to make things as equal as I could, but just so folks out there who might be thinking, well, full frame is definitely better, I need a full frame over a crop sensor. Here are two cameras that I own. Wanted to show you the differences between the two, and you can kind of decide whether you think full frame is worth it or not. So with that said, let's just jump right into the pictures. All right, let's look at the pictures. I'm going to keep the Fuji on the left and the Sony on the right. I used the Fringer adapter for the Fuji so that I could put my Canon lenses on there, and I used the MC11 adapter, the Sigma MC11 adapter for the Sony so that I could fit the same lenses. And I took 3 different lenses, took some different shots with those different lenses, and tried to match up the pictures as best I could, or the framing as best I could, but you'll see some differences as we go through this. And basically I started out with the Canon 70-200 f4. So what you're seeing now is on the left hand side is the Fuji, and you can see the information about exposure. This is I put it on auto ISO, set it to f4, which is the maximum aperture for this lens, and 1/100th of the shutter speed, and then let the camera control the ISO. So you'll see the differences in that. First, here is the Fuji. These are both, or all these shots are going to be straight out of camera. You can see that ISO is 1000 here, and on the Sony, the ISO is 640. You kind of expect that for full frame versus crop, but we'll look at the pictures and we'll see how the quality is. Again, these are all just standard profiles from each of the cameras, straight out of the camera, no editing done at all. First, we'll start just looking at kind of the shakers and the clarity. Again, it's the same lens. You can see these pretty much look identical, forgetting about some minor differences in color. Really what I want to focus on is the exposure, the field of view, and then look at the bokeh. And if you look at these without zooming in, looking at the bokeh, is there a huge difference in this shot between the two? I don't see it. Maybe if we zoom in a little here, you might say that the Sony is a little bit creamier, but man, I'm surprised at how well this Fuji, which is an APS-c camera, does against this full frame Sony. You can see at 24 millimeters here, the field of view is going to be wider on the Sony. That's the full frame with no crop versus the 1.5x crop on the Fuji. So from a bokeh perspective, I think they look pretty good. And actually looking at the quality, you can see on the left, the Fuji at that higher ISO does look a little mushier. But again, I don't think that that's a huge difference. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on. And this is at 135 millimeters, roughly, f4, again, 1/100th shutter speed. And you can see, again, the photos, they look pretty close. Maybe you're starting to see a little bit better bokeh here on the Sony side. But again, looking at the exposure, this is the Fuji is at ISO 640, and then the Sony is at ISO 500. So again, there's a difference there, maybe not a huge difference. The lighting is the same. So again, looking at the shakers, they look pretty close. Let's look at the bokeh here, and probably can see a little more detail here in the Fuji side, but you definitely can. I don't know how this comes through on YouTube, but I can tell you that looking at it here, you can see that it's not as creamy on the Fuji side, but again, pretty good results from a APS-c camera compared to a full frame camera. So let's move up to 200 millimeters on that same Canon 70-200 f4 lens. And so the Fuji is at ISO 800, and you'll see that the Sony is at ISO 500. Zoom in here. Again, they both look Both look good. Looking at the bokeh, pretty close again. You can see the difference in ISO. The Fuji looks a little bit mushier or less clean, but that's the difference. One of the differences you'll see in full frame versus the APS-c on the Fuji. So let's now move over to the 85mm f1.8, and this is shot at f1.8, and you can see the ISO here on the Fuji is 160, which is the base ISO for Fuji. So it's the lowest ISO, and then you can see it's 100 here on the Sony side. This shot definitely shows a bigger difference in a couple of ways. You can see the bokeh, clearly the Sony wins there. But interestingly, and this is maybe common, that same lens on a crop sensor shows this purple fringing, chromatic aberration. You can see it looks very noticeable. Even if you're not zooming in, you can see it. But when you zoom in, you can see on the left on the Fuji that it's there. On the right, it's not, or it's barely noticeable on the Sony. But looking at the bokeh here, and this is a great lens. It's a $350 lens, I think, something like that, full frame lens. This looks much different as far as bokeh goes. Definitely a win for the Sony here. And this is at 24mm. This is the 24-105 EF lens from Canon. So you can see, again, field of view is different for sure. That the full frame is going to give you a wider field of view because of that. There's no crop, basically. Looking at the pictures, they look pretty close to one another. The difference in ISO, we're looking at 500 on the Fuji, and in this case 500 for the Sony. Looking at bokeh, I mean, it's a 24mm shot. You're not going to expect amazing bokeh, but they do look pretty much the same in this shot, I think. So I don't think there's really any difference there. Let's move over on that same lens to 50mm. So here we are at 50mm on both. You can see ISO 800 on the Fuji, ISO 500 on the Sony. Zooming in, again, you know, the center looks pretty much the same. The bokeh in this one, I think there's an edge here, again, to the full frame Sony. And just looking at the quality of the pictures, the difference between 800, 500 doesn't seem to be that large here. They look, from a quality perspective, they look pretty much the same. So I think this Fuji is doing a really respectable job against the A7 III, which I really love. The A7 III, one of my favorite cameras. So now we're going to go up to 105mm. And again, the difference in the ISO, this is ISO 1000 and ISO 1000. Interesting. Let's check and make sure I've got that right. There's the Fuji. There's the Sony. Yep. So we've got the same ISO. It's f5.6, 105mm. And you can see again, looks good in the center. For bokeh, man, again, just a slight edge to the Sony. So those are the pictures that I wanted to show. What can we gather from this? Well, I guess it depends. I would say that the APS-c cameras are definitely catching up as far as quality goes, bokeh goes, depth of field. But it does seem, at least in this case, with the lenses that I've used, that the Sony does show a slight edge. If you want that kind of creamier bokeh, especially at that 85mm f1.8. But I was really impressed with the Fuji. Well, there you go. A non-scientific, non-fair test, but just wanted to show you the differences between the Fuji X-T3, which is one of the best, in my opinion, crop sensor cameras on the market, compared to the A7 III, which, in my opinion, is one of the best full-frame cameras on the market. And you can decide which one might be right for you, or maybe neither is right for you. But I just wanted to show you, again, not fair, not scientific. Just wanted to show you kind of the differences. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. If you do subscribe, please click on that bell icon. You'll be notified when we have a new video or when we go live. Get out there and have your photo gear fun. I will talk at you again in the next video.